This is Kristen Bell.
And Adam Brody.
And we're dating.
In our new show, Nobody Wants This.
Right. We're not really dating.
No, in real life, we're married.
Right. Married to other people, not each other.
Oh, this is complicated.
Right. It's just like our love lives in Nobody Wants This, a show about what happens when a bold and sometimes provocative podcast host finds her unlikely match in a sweet traditional rabbi.
You can watch every episode of Nobody Wants This now, only on Netflix.
This next one actually was really sad. I was kind of sad writing it. So a few weeks after Hendrix's death, Janis Joplin also joined the 27 Club, with her death being arguably one of the most tragic ones of all. So Joplin was born in Texas on January 19th, 1943. She was an outcast from childhood all the way through college, and that led her to turn to music, specifically the blues. So in college, Janis had the reputation of being, quote, a creep.
Creep?
Yeah, and this may have been due to the fact that she was usually barefoot and she always carried an auto harp on her.
Oh, okay.
So in January of 1963, she ended up dropping out of college and she hitchhiked to San Francisco. So the issue is, as she got more and more famous and she toured more and more places, her drug problem grew larger and larger. She was already like a heavy drinker. She used amphetamines and psychedelics, until eventually she ended up finding heroin.
Of course, heroin. Yeah, sure.
Heroin is always the one that does them in, because you could do the other drugs and like, yeah, it's not great, but heroin, you know, oof.
There's a level of destruction that happens much faster with heroin and other things like it in comparison to other things. The other things are still destructive, but the speed at which it destroys you is so much faster.
Yeah. And so in 1965, she met her best friend, Caserta, who also had similar problems with drugs. So in 1966, Janis's career blew up. She became the lead singer of Big Brother and the Holding Company. She began recording hit songs, touring, and even dating some really big names. And in 1969, she performed at Woodstock, just like Jimi Hendrix.
Okay, yeah, a lot of these people are on the same time frame for that.
So this newfound fame took its toll on her, however. She was reported by her close friends to be very shy and timid off stage. She was afraid, really naive, just not what you would expect of someone who's super famous. But on stage, she came to life and she became an amazing performer. But the thing is, she didn't know how to navigate this newfound fame that she had. And so when she stepped off stage, she didn't know who to be or how to act. And that led to a lot of problems for her. And then on October 4th, 1970, Joplin ended up being discovered in her hotel room by her manager, John Cook. So he went to find her because she was late for a recording session. But what he found was Janis lying dead in her room with change in one hand and a pack of cigarettes in the other. There were bottles of alcohol and a syringe in the room with her, but surprisingly, there weren't any drugs found. The coroner, Thomas Noguchi, said that Janis's friends must have removed the drugs from the room, but then they realized that it would show up on her tox report, so they probably brought them back. Her autopsy concluded that she did die from a heroin overdose, which was compounded by alcohol. But the theory was that she died from a very strong batch of heroin, which was a reasonable assumption because that same weekend, a lot of other people in the area also overdosed.
Oh, that is fast. Okay, so I have to mention something on that here because this is the whole thing comes from it. So people talk about standardization with drugs and all that and what it is you can do and how there is none when it comes to the illegal substances. Like there were so many different variants of where poppy would grow, where ephedra grows when it comes to meth and stuff out of Afghanistan, that they were depending upon the altitude at which you would be getting something, it would change the concentration of what you would want for the drug. So you could get a batch that was nothing, or you could get a batch that was this will fuck you up and kill you.
It's not. Wow. That's not great.
Nope.
So after tracing Janis's steps, her publicist concluded that Janis had taken a lethal amount of heroin and then overdosed after buying cigarettes. However, this story was rejected by Joplin's friend Caserta. You see, Caserta herself was an overdose survivor, and based on her own experiences, she didn't think that it was possible for Joplin to overdose and then walk out to get cigarettes. Caserta believes that Joplin instead may have died from her heel getting stuck on the carpet, which caused her to fall and break her nose and asphyxiate blood. But whatever the circumstances surrounding her death, Joplin joined the 27 Club just 16 days after Jimi Hendrix. Okay, so these deaths are all so sad and all so similar, you know?
They really are.
But just they were drinking, doing hard drugs, smoking cigarettes. It's so stressful. But they were all so young and dealing with what seems like overnight fame. They all died within a few years of gaining mass popularity. Like, you noticed that, right?
They did.
So, I feel like now, I think in today's world, people still don't see celebrities as people, but they were relatively young people with all of this fame and they had no idea how to process it. And they were potentially some of the most famous worldwide international famed people in a new world where it was easier to gain worldwide fame.
Yeah, whereas technology allows so much more, especially in the nowadays. Like you see all the people that go and blow up on TikTok or other short form things that can skyrocket you to fame so much faster than anything of any previous generation. And some people do not handle it well, or they don't want to. I mean, hell, even between the two of us, you don't like doing nearly as many things in public.
Oh no, people scare me. But like, so you've seen Chappell Roan?
Yes.
And she's trying to set boundaries with her fans to be like, hey, I'm a person, be respectful, because people were like stalking her and stuff. But the crazy thing is that when she was asking for people to just respect her boundaries, people who were allegedly fans were like, this, it was a controversial opinion. People weren't like, okay, yeah, we should be normal. We shouldn't be weird. They were like mad about it. They were like, well, she's just not built for this. No, she's a human being who doesn't want to be stalked. Like, what?
See, that is the same thing for justification that people would use for like the paparazzi that would go and chase people.
Oh, don't
like
even get
the
me
whole
started.
thing with Princess Diana and the whole thing. And it's like people are like, oh, well, they're royalty. They're always in the limelight. It's like, yeah, but the level of harassment, like at some point, it's not even coverage or interest. It's literally harassment.
Yeah, it's not. There's a whole story, like a whole discussion to be had about the ethics of jobs like paparazzi, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's just to feed a gossip mill to what? Satisfy people's curiosity about another human being. I don't know. There's a conversation to be had, but we're not going to have it here. Okay. So next up, we have Dave Alexander. Honestly, in this list, there's just a really huge trend of musicians and copious amounts of drugs. That is no different when talking about the next member of the club. So Dave is a figure from the 1960s going into the 70s. He was an American musician best known for being the original bassist for a rather influential band called the Stooges. The Stooges are what we would call proto-punk. Punk before it was really a thing of later decades with the original band members, including Iggy Pop as singer, guitarist Ron Ashton, drummer Scott Ashton, and of course our bassist Dave Alexander. At the time the band started, Dave was a young 20-year-old who already had quite a bit of a wild streak. So fun fact, the guy dropped out of high school 45 minutes into his senior year in order to win a bet.
Which is a little bit.
That is something. So yeah, we can definitely say that forethought and planning was not one of his greatest strengths. Alexander and the Ashton brothers would form the band The Stooges in 1967 with singer Iggy Pop, despite the fact that Dave was a complete novice with absolutely no musical training. So this would change rather quickly though, and it soon became apparent that he was a fast learner and he would actually compose a number of songs in the band's first two albums. But what about the fame? That's where things usually pop off. Well, the Stooges quickly gained a reputation for being wild during their live performances. Remember, those of you who want to make it on social media or something, that if you really want to make it, you have to know how to bring attention to yourself. And the singer Iggy, well, he certainly did when he would smear his bare chest with hamburger meat and peanut butter, cut himself with glass shards on stage in acts of self-mutilation, and straight up just flash his penis.
He just didn't like.
So, despite these antics and fun performances, their first two albums actually didn't do that well, and they were actually received negatively by the public and critics. Their big saving grace, though, would be their live performances and showmanship. But that is exactly what would bring our guy Dave Alexander down. So in the August of 1970, the band was supposed to play at the Goose Lake Musical Festival. The problem was that Alexander decided to have a few too many drinks, among other things perhaps, before the show, and so when he arrived, it was clear that the man was heavily intoxicated. As a result of this, he ended up being fired from the band. I didn't know bands could fire you.
Oh yeah, they absolutely can.
That's crazy. So per the words of Ron Ashton, Dave fucked up because before Goose Lake, Dave stopped getting high. And when he knew it was such a big crowd, he smoked a bunch of dope, drank some whiskey, and when he got on stage, he forgot all the songs. But we powered through enough that it was still good. And when we got off stage, Jim said, he's fired. He's gone.
Which is a very definitive, like, I imagine going up there and him just like, oh, bro, I can't play, man. Everything is spinning. I don't know what this song is. You wrote it. I don't know what it is.
That actually is, he's not the only musician, actually. One of them that we'll cover later, Amy Winehouse, same thing happened. She forgot her own lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, kind of sad. So it's at this point that I need to mention something. So this case is not unique in the band. By this point, every single member of the band besides Ron Ashton were heavy heroin users, a drug that was literally given to them by their band manager, John Adams. Perhaps it's because under the influence of drugs, their performances would be even wilder. But sometimes it got so bad that people would actually would have trouble standing on the stage. This got so bad, their record company dropped them, and the Stooges would break up for the first time in 1971. As for Dave, there's not much else to say. Getting fired from the band was the beginning of the end, with him diving headfirst into as much alcohol as he could get his hands on at any moment. He tried his hand at the stock market, but that wouldn't bring him the success of before. He ended up getting sick and was admitted to the hospital where he ended up being diagnosed with pancreatitis. Dave Alexander died on February 10, 1975, at the age of 27 from pulmonary edema with fibrous pneumonitis because of his alcoholism. He was cremated the following day, and that was it. No more fame outside of his initial success as a founding member of the band.
Okay, this next one that we're going to be covering on here, this is actually one of the ones that I did research on here. And now I'm telling you this right now. These are all quite sad at different points, but some of them are even worse. Like this one that we're going to be talking about next, Pete Ham, this one is just straight up depressing. So considering the length of this podcast episode, I'm going to try to keep this thing quick. We have the story of Pete Ham. Now, Pete Ham was one of the first singer-songwriters in Badfish, which is a British pop band from the 1960s and 70s that actually worked with really big names like Paul McCartney. In fact, their big song that would make them super famous was Come and Get It, and that was a top 10 hit worldwide and was composed by McCartney, not actually any of the members of the actual band. And this would skyrocket them to fame practically overnight. This is one of those same cases like what you were already telling the story of here before, of they would just have a hit that would skyrocket them, and from then they would have to try to capitalize upon it. Now, interestingly enough, about this, Ham did not want to use a non-original song from a person that was not in the band to promote the band. But he very quickly was convinced that the springboard effect of having this mega hit title was going to allow the band to do so much more. And this belief and action would eventually pay off when his song, No Matter What, became another top 10 worldwide hit in late 1970. The band at this point had multiple top 10 hits and was making it big time. But that glory was not going to last forever, as trouble was going to knock pretty hard. In 1972, Badfinger was picked up by Warner Brothers Records, as Apple Records, their previous label that they were under, was falling apart. It was straight up crumbling. And it seemed that the band at this point, being picked up by Warner Brothers, was going to make it even bigger. But then a legal dispute broke out. Here's where it gets really messy. Stan Poley, the business manager of the band, negotiated a new records contract with the Warner Brothers for Badfinger, which called for advances to be paid into an escrow account. Now, while I do not have the exact amount that was given in the first place, approximately $100,000. Remember, this is like the early 1970s. So wait, actually, hold on that note. Gabby, how much is $100,000 from 1972? How much is that today? We always got to check the inflation on these things, and I should have done this in the first place when doing the research for this. Because, oh my lord, that can be a lot.
When choosing a new podcast to listen to, I always try to find the best balance between entertainment and education. Specifically, I try to find shows that teach me something new and help me to expand my understanding of the world around me, or just inspire me to think in different ways. That's why I love the Silver Linings Handbook. This podcast tagline is interesting conversations with interesting people, and it definitely lives up to it. This podcast is completely unscripted and is hosted by a former journalist who worked at the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and other newspapers. The host's approach to interviews is focused on the idea that suffering is the one thing that is universal, and because of this, he sees this as an opportunity to help others grow and learn from different lived experiences. The guests of the show are interviewed with natural curiosity, which leads to a more authentic conversational experience. Episodes that are coming up are right up the alley of our mystery lovers, as the author Alison Dickinson will be joining to discuss what we learn from psychological thrillers. And in another episode, former FBI profiler Julia Crowley will join for an episode of the real-life nightmare of the Golden State Killer. So if any of this resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to Silver Linings Handbook wherever you listen to podcasts.
Everybody shush! William Shatner has something to say.
Cat and Jethro, box of oddities.
What do you do when the woman you love dies? Well, of course, you dig her up and you live with her.
Aww.
The show examines weird things.
There are plenty of old photographs from this time period of children out in the streets playing in and among the dead horse carcasses.
Oh, I miss those days. Things used to be so much simpler.
Cat and Jethro.
Then there's the urine wheel, which sounds like a really bad game show.
They've done weird things. Cat and Jethro, box of oddities. That is really mysterious.
Join Cat and Jethro Gilligan Toth for the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected, as they lift the lid and cautiously peer inside the Box of Oddities.
The Webby Award-winning Box of Oddities podcast from Airwave Media.
$753,100.48.
Now you all are going to understand how serious this is. So this money straight up disappeared from the escrow account as soon as Poley got access to it. Warner Brothers would sue, but Poley is not the guy who would suffer from here, despite his lawsuit. It was the band. Their next album, because of the dispute, was withdrawn. The checks that they were paid in March bounced at the bank, and their April checks literally never arrived. They just never got them. The band was set to lose everything, but it was even worse for some members like Pete, as Pete had just bought a house. It was like in Surrey, I think it was, for £30,000. And his girlfriend was pregnant. Not only was she pregnant, she was about to pop. She was like 7 or 8 months pregnant by this point. The band tried to continue without Poley's involvement by contacting booking agents and other prospective managers throughout London, but they were declined because of their contracts with Poley were so restrictive and also impending legal action. They were stuck. For Pete, there was only one way out of this hell. On the night of the 23rd of April, 1975, Ham received a phone call from the United States telling him that all of his money was gone. Later that night, he met Tom Evans, and they went to the White Hart pub in Surrey, where they reportedly had around 10 whiskeys. During the drinking spree, he apparently told Evans, quote, "I know a way forward. I know what to do." And what he then did was disappear into his garage after the drinking at 3 a.m., tie a noose around his neck, and take his own life. He had scrawled a note that read, quote, "Anne," this being referring to his girlfriend, "I love you. I will not be allowed to love and trust everybody. This is better. Pete. P.S. Stan Poley is a soulless bastard. I will take him with me." End quote. He was 3 days shy of his 28th birthday, and his daughter was born 1 month after his death. In May, Warner Brothers would terminate its contract with Badfinger, and the band was dissolved. Evans never recovered from the loss of his best friend, telling those close to him, quote, "I want to be where Pete is." Evans would also take his own life in 1983 and would choose to hang himself in a suicide that mirrored Ham's. As for the business manager, Stampoli, this is the part that actually pissed me off more than anything else when I was reading this. So remember last night when you're up here and we're both exclaiming to each other about what it is that we were finding and doing?
Yeah.
And this one went like, oh, this bastard.
Yeah.
He never got punished. Or rather, he kind of lost a couple lawsuits, but he kept on doing what it is that he did. He managed to live out his days to the ripe old age of 87, not 27, 87, and died in 2009. Badfinger was only one of many clients that Poli would defraud over the years, with untold amounts of damage to the music industry being done. I mean, we're talking about artists that were up and coming in the late 60s going into the 70s, whose music careers were completely crushed. So we actually had people who ended up losing everything, quitting music, and not pursuing anything else because of this manager. He actually stopped people from producing music that we would otherwise have today.
Was there like no word of mouth that he was terrible?
Well, sort of, yes, but there's no internet. It's the 70s.
I mean, musicians would talk to each other.
Correct.
Surely, like influencers talk to each other. We all give each other advice. We're like, oh yeah, don't deal with this person. Don't deal with that management company. So surely.
So I don't have a lot of the names in here, but when I was doing the research on this guy and I went on a little side tangent going and finding him, a lot of the names that I saw him representing got their start in like 1968, 1969, 1970, 1971.
So they were close together.
They were new. So they're not only were they at the same time, but simultaneously, these were new artists, hadn't had previous established music careers or industry or contact within the industry itself. So they didn't have people that would be able to tell them, hey, stay away from this guy.
Did he die wealthy?
I don't know about his degree of wealth. In the 90s, he got sued by another guy and lost the case for $250,000. But there was nothing that I could find as to his actual status of wealth by that point.
Huh.
So,
Pharma sometimes drops the ball.
I'm curious, but yeah, he defrauded dozens of people and took millions of dollars worth of money today.
Wow. Well, next up is Kurt Cobain. So it's like depressing, very depressing, super depressing. Yeah, it's not this episode, man. Okay. So probably one of the most famous figures to join the 27 Club in semi-recent years. I say recent years, but it's literally before I was born, so not that recent. But Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, was also a 27 Club member, with his own mother, Wendy O'Connor, saying, quote, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." So Kurt Cobain was born in 1967 in Washington State. He was always a really talented child. It seemed as though he could hear a song on the radio and then afterward he just played by ear.
Basically rock Mozart.
So his sister was quoted as saying he was able to artistically put whatever he thought onto paper or into music. But at the age of 9, the once happy and carefree Kurt was faced with the divorce of his parents. And for a few years, he relied heavily on an imaginary friend named Boda to get him through. Like, he literally felt like he could only trust his imaginary friend, which is really sad. So his parents' divorce was one of those events that he genuinely could not get over. He's quoted as saying that he had a really good childhood until his parents' divorce at the age of 9. So interestingly enough, this divorce is something that is believed to have led to his suicide decades later.
Ooh, you need to explain that.
So it's reported that after the divorce, Kurt stopped eating and he actually had to be treated for malnutrition. In addition, he lived with his dad and he specifically requested that his dad never date or remarry. And even though his dad did say, yeah, like I promise, he did get remarried soon after. In addition, his father treated his stepson better than Kurt out of the fear that he would be left by his new wife, which, oh my gosh.
Oh, that is like, there's a difference. Like that could happen to a teenager who could kind of process and understand it, even if it will screw them up. But for that to happen to a kid that is preteen at that, like 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
That is key developmental time.
Yeah. So, I mean, imagine treating your stepson better than your own son to please your wife. Though I'm not judging. I am judging. That's terrible. So all of this led to emotional baggage that Kurt would take with him for the rest of his life. And because of this, his eventual suicide usually led back to his parents' split and his subsequent treatment in comparison to his step-siblings by his parents. So through all of this, however, Cobain stuck with his music. and 20-year-old Kurt would meet the bandmates that would lead to the founding of the iconic band Nirvana. In 1991, they released Nevermind, and this led to massive success for them. But even with his newfound fame and success, Cobain was still fighting his demons. He was reported as going from happy and outgoing to silent and withdrawn, like almost instantly. Like he'd go back and forth. His manager said he was a walking time bomb and nobody could do anything about it. Things were so bad that the day after Nevermind knocked Michael Jackson off the #1 spot on the charts, Cobain was actually found overdosed on heroin by his wife.
Heroin again.
Yeah. So luckily she was able to revive him. But before his death, Cobain developed a very intense heroin addiction. Unfortunately, he was never able to beat it. And the thing is, he had a heroin addiction and his wife had a heroin addiction. So it's not great. So then in 1994, Nirvana left for the European leg of their In Utero tour. At this point, Kurt Cobain had gotten married to his wife, Courtney Love, and he had a daughter named Frances. However, with all of the amazingly positive things that he had going on for him, he was still not able to kick the sadness that seemed to engulf him. So 5 days into this tour, he asked for it to be canceled. He was struggling with the reality of being a star and dealing with a wife that was an addict, as well as being an addict himself. On March 4th, 1994, a few weeks into their tour, Cobain got into a fight with his wife on the phone. So already dealing with the stress of having his daughter at home all the way on the other side of the world, and then just like the overall stress of the tour, he ran into the opening act's dressing room talking about how desperate he was to get a divorce and just break up Nirvana.
Yeah, that's okay. That's pretty extreme to do, especially with a lot of people who literally have their livelihood on the line.
So while they did perform that night, he ended up ending the show early and he blamed it on being sick with laryngitis. So sadly, though, this was the last show Nirvana ever played. The band ended up taking a 10-day break after this, and Cobain made his way to Rome where he and his wife and daughter could all be together. But sadly, on March 4th, he ended up overdosing on Rohypnol, and his wife found him unresponsive. So the sad thing is, even though he wrote a note, his management claimed that, this was an accident. He didn't mean to do this, like this wasn't intentional. But he wrote a note. He left a note. But then it was later revealed by his wife that he actually took about 50 pills.
There's not an accident in which you can do 50 pills.
And then his note stated, "I'd rather die than go through another divorce." So in order for him to recover, the band just ended up rescheduling the tour dates. And his wife, even though she herself was an addict, she banned the use of drugs at home. However, Cobain was an addict and he found a way. So on March 18th, police got involved in an incident where he had locked himself in his room with a revolver with the stated intent of suicide. Luckily, the police were able to intervene and take the revolver and any pills that he had. But then on March 25th, his wife and bandmates hosted an intervention. At this point, everyone was incredibly concerned. At the intervention, his wife threatened divorce if he didn't go to rehab, and his bandmates threatened leaving the band.
Oh.
Yeah. But sadly, the only thing this did was anger him.
Yeah.
And this intervention became the last time that Courtney Love and many of his friends would ever see him alive.
I have to question this in here, and I'm sorry, because that using that in an argument is terrible at that point, because he literally wrote in his suicide note, "I would rather die than go through another divorce." So threatening someone with divorce who is ready to kill themselves that's not an effective tool to stop someone.
Yeah. Yeah. His wife did admit that she deeply regretted the intervention, though. She said like the 80s tough love bullshit doesn't work. I think she said something along those lines from what I was reading. It not only didn't work, it actually just drove him away, But on March 29th, Cobain had another near fatal overdose. This man is just like begging for death. But he also survived this one. After this, he supposedly visited one of his friends to borrow a gun that he stated was for use against trespassers. So this friend, Dylan Carlson, said that he had loaned Cobain guns before and that Kurt seemed normal.
That is, oh my God, seemed normal. The revolver locked in a closet, threatening to kill himself.
Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't know. But the weird thing is Cobain went to this guy, Dylan, and had him buy the gun and everything because he didn't want the police to find out. that he was the one buying the gun, which like that is a dead ringer for like someone who's not, they shouldn't have a gun, right?
Yeah, absolutely
like you
not.
shouldn't buy guns for people.
Well, no, you can buy something specifically for, so there's a number of things has to be done regarding background checks, and the laws are different in different states.
They ask you when you go to buy a gun, are you buying this to give it away, or are you, because they don't want you to be buying it to give it away.
No, but there are some people who buy something as a gift specifically for someone,
Well,
and
yeah,
you can do
I
so.
guess.
But if you buy something for yourself with a plan of giving it to someone who's not supposed to have one, that's a completely different thing.
Well, I think he was allowed to have guns. They just didn't want him having guns because he was suicidal. He was suicidal, Stephen. Like, you can't give the man a gun.
No.
Like, I feel like the thing, though, is if someone's suicidal, does that have like a note somewhere if cops were involved? So, like, when they do a background check, they'd be like, oh, nope. See, I wouldn't know these things. I don't buy many guns. Anyway. So on March 29th, after his near fatal overdose, he gets this gun. And it was really weird that he was getting the gun. So Dylan Carlson, the guy who got the gun for him, was like, hey, I'll hold on to this because aren't you leaving for rehab? Why would you buy a gun right before you leave for rehab? But Kurt was like, no, I'll take it. It's fine. So he gives him the gun. Shortly after buying this, though, Cobain flew to California to enter rehab. But on April 1st, after 2 days of being a patient, he called his wife and said, quote, Courtney, no matter what happens, I want you to know that you made a really good record. Just remember, no matter what, I love you. Then that night, Cobain left the rehab center where he said he was just going to get a quick smoke outside. But what he did was he actually ended up jumping the fence, which was a 6-foot-tall wall. And by the time this was discovered, and his cards could be canceled and his disappearance could be reported and his wife could hire a private investigator to track him down, he had already flown back home to Seattle. So the sad thing is the exact details of his death are unknown. He had locked himself in the greenhouse above his garage, and even though his house was searched 3 times, no one thought to check the greenhouse. Like, that's wow. So on April 5th, Cobain wrote his note. I'm not going to read it here because it's really sad, but you can easily Google it. He left his wallet on the floor, and he settled down with his stash of heroin. Then he pointed his shotgun at his head and fired. And this is the story of how Kurt Cobain became a member of the 27 Club.
And also how it spawned the memes of when people would make guns in games that allow you to craft guns, and you can create something that does extra headshot damage with Kurt Cobain's microphone.
Wow, that's messed up. So obviously there have been many questions about his death. Toxicology reports indicated, according to a private investigator, Tom Grant, that no man could ingest as much heroin as Cobain had and still shoot a shotgun. So the investigator also said that the writing in the second half of his note is inconsistent with the writing at the beginning. However, handwriting analysts disagree with this claim. The general consensus is that Kurt Cobain's death was a suicide. His death rocked fans all around the world.
Damn.
Yeah.
What do you get when you take 2 childhood friends with a passion for unexplored history and a whole lot of booze?
You get the goofiest game in history, Queen's Podcast.
Hi, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Katie, and we're the hosts of Queen's Podcast.
Join us while we spill the tea on women from history.
We get into all kinds of stories here, like biographies of lesser-known figures. For instance, Saida Al-Hura, powerful pirate queen.
To the stories you might already know, like Marie Antoinette or Cleopatra, but with a fun twist.
Each queen is paired with a cocktail that'll totally get you in the mood to hear fun, juicy, and dramatic stories from history.
Because history is so much more than just dudes on a battlefield, and we believe that the female perspective and roles are just as deserving of their time in the spotlight.
Right. So come get to know these queens. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Cheers.
Hey y'all, spooky season is here. And if you're looking for a show to whet your appetite for a little haunted history, then I'd like to invite you to check out Southern Gothic, a chart-topping history podcast that explores some of the most infamous legends, folklore, ghost stories, and hauntings of the American South. We've covered all sorts of stuff from the Bell Witch of Tennessee to the disappearance of the Confederate submarine, the H.L. Hunley, not to mention our deep dives into the local lore of some of America's oldest and most haunted cities, like New Orleans, Charleston, and St. Augustine. So, if you're ready for a little good old-fashioned Halloween storytelling with a commitment to quality historical research, then be sure to check out Southern Gothic today. It's available now on all your favorite podcast apps.
So the final story that we're going to cover today is the story of Amy Winehouse. Winehouse was born on September 14, 1983 in London, England. She had always wanted to become a famous musician, and she came from a family that really embraced music. Like Kurt Cobain, her parents also divorced when she was 9 years old, and she was impacted by this divorce, although she drew inspiration for her songs from this event. At the age of 12, she applied to a theater school, and in her application she wrote, "I want to go somewhere where I'm stretched right to my limits and perhaps even beyond, to sing in lessons without being told to shut up. But mostly I have this dream to be very famous, to work on stage. It's a lifelong ambition. I want people to hear my voice and just forget their troubles for 5 minutes." So from the age of 14, she was writing songs. And at the age of 16, her demo tape was actually passed on to a label that was looking for a vocalist. And this was passed by like a fellow musician. This tape did lead to her getting her first record deal, though, at the age of 19. And then in 2003, she released her debut album. At this point, Amy was already showing signs of substance abuse, however. So she started to rise to fame as her album grew in popularity. And then she met her husband, Blake Fielder Civil, at a pub in London. You know, like sometimes when you meet someone and it can either be like the best thing ever or the worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah.
I feel like this was one of the cases where it was the worst thing that can happen to you. But she fell head over heels in love with him. And many people around her said that after meeting him, she changed drastically. They said it seemed like she became an entirely different person. Even though Amy was someone who would smoke weed, she was never a person who did any harder drugs. Like, she was quoted as making fun of those people. She looked down on people who would like do the harder stuff, you know, like it was just not something she personally would do. But her husband was the person who ended up introducing her to cocaine and heroin. And then when her second album catapulted her even higher into stardom in 2006, things got even rockier. So she married Blake, and this marriage kept her and their relationship in the spotlight. But it wasn't due to like, oh, this is such a cute couple. It was actually due to issues like arrests for drug possession and assault. To say it was rocky was an understatement. So it seemed as though even though she was successful, her husband, her parents, and her addiction were working against her. Winehouse refused to go to rehab, and her father is alleged that he agreed with her because he wanted her to keep on working. Then in 2008, she ended up winning 6 Grammys, but her legal trouble prevented her from being able to get a visa to enter the US. So she had to essentially zoom in to her acceptance speech. So in her speech, she thanked her husband, who was at the time in prison for assault. So yeah, it just wasn't great. And then later that very year, her father announced that she had developed emphysema due to her cocaine usage. But it was then discovered that she had early signs of the illness instead of like the full illness. So that's important to know. But at this point, she was struggling hard. She had allegedly quit drug use in 2008, but she was still a raging alcoholic. She was doing her best to quit though, and she actually went to rehab multiple times, but she wasn't able to recover. Then on top of that, it is said she also developed an eating disorder. And then by 2009, she and her husband, they ended up getting a divorce. But her downward spiral was leading her to canceling shows. She was barely doing performances. And when she did perform, she couldn't typically get through the entire thing without her addiction getting in the way somehow. In 2011, she was about to start her comeback tour. And just 1 month before her death, she performed in Serbia. But the thing is, this performance was terrible. She was so drunk, she couldn't sing her own songs. And she didn't even know where she was. The audience ended up booing so loudly, like they were booing louder than the music, because there's like 20,000 people booing her at this point.
She's not just like some small thing at a bar. No, this is a really big event.
And so she actually had to leave the stage. And sadly, this was her last performance ever. That makes me sad though, because she was so big and well-known and talented that being her last performance, like that is so sad. But after this show, Amy, she started medication to help her with withdrawals and anxiety. But once again, she wasn't able to stay sober. People say it's because she would get sober, then she would get bored, then she would drink. So she kept relapsing. And
then when she would drink, her decision-making abilities were significantly lowered, and then she would relapse.
Keep going. So on July 22nd, 2011, which was the day before she died, Amy actually called her doctor and she said she didn't want to die, but she had once again relapsed and she was apologizing for wasting the doctor's time and she was so sorry. And then they said goodbye. But that very night, Amy would end up passing away. She stayed up with her bodyguard that night watching videos of her earlier performances, and then she went to bed. At 10 a.m., her bodyguard attempted to wake her, but she was asleep. But by 3 p.m., when she still hadn't woken up, he realized there was something seriously wrong. Like he noticed she had not moved in 5 hours. And then when he checked for her pulse, she was gone. Amy Winehouse had died of alcohol poisoning, alone in her bed, with vodka bottles all around her. Her tox reports show that she had a blood alcohol level of 0.416, which was 5 times the legal limit in England. The very sad thing about this particular member of the 27 Club is that while others have had conspiracies surrounding their deaths, Amy's death is generally accepted for what it is, an unfortunate event caused by self-destructive habits. She was amazingly talented, but even her own mother was quoted at one point as saying that she was never meant to live past 30. And with
Ouch.
this,
observing your daughter's lifestyle and actually watching the way things are going down. Yeah.
And with this story, this is the last of the 27 Club members that we will be covering. I think we see a common theme in almost all of these. Young people at the height of their fame struggling with mental health issues, substance abuse, and falling into very unfortunate circumstances despite their fame. So, does the 27 Club theory hold any weight? What do you think?
I think that it does, but not for the reasons that people think from conspiracy theories. Like, I think you said this yourself to me, either yesterday or the day before, like when you were doing research for this episode.
I've been writing this for like a week now.
And you said that when is it that we started to make it bigger on social media? I was 27. You were 26, turning 27.
No, you were 26 when you really blew up.
Yes. So at that point, you're talking about for people if they get out of college at like the age of 22, assuming that they don't do grad school, that's 5 years of those are arguably some of the most productive exploratory years of your life, or could be theoretically. So for those who have talent or ability to do something really big, those are the years in which you could skyrocket to fame. And yet simultaneously, you don't have the decision making capabilities of like people typically do when they're in their 30s and established.
Yeah.
At least that's my personal thought. So for a lot of these people, every single one of these is just, there's at least a degree of self-destruction, with I would argue 80% of it being self-destruction with 20% outside factors.
Yeah. Yeah. So a study that was published in the British Medical Journal back in 2011 found that there was no increase in death for musicians or actors at the age of 27. However, as humans, we typically want to be able to explain things that are morbid and that kind of bother us. And that is how we find a lot of conspiracy theories. The 27 Club is a way for people to kind of make sense of the death of someone that they may be idolized. Instead of them passing away, unfortunately, they might reason that they have been almost chosen to be part of this club of very famous and talented people that were seemingly gone too soon. So we see a similar phenomenon. Do you know the Glee curse, Stephen?
No, what is that?
You know the TV show Glee?
I know Glee. I have 2 little sisters. I know Glee.
Well, it was super popular and like 3 of the big name actors have died in the last 10 years.
Did they?
Well, 11 now. Yeah. So in 2013, Corey Monteith, the actor who played Finn, he died of an overdose. Finn, he was the one who was dating, was it the girl with the brown hair?
I'll be honest.
He played football, I'm pretty sure. He was like the jock, very talented.
Oh, okay.
But then Mark Salling, the actor who played Puck, he died by suicide in 2018. And then Naya Rivera, the actress that played Santana, She was the cheerleader. She drowned in 2020. So with so many of the large stars of the show dying so young and in really unfortunate ways, fans of the show started the theory of the show being cursed. And while it may seem far-fetched that simply working on a TV show could lead to a curse that killed its actors, a lot of people believed in this. They thought it held some weight. I mean, it is weird, right? But in an interview with The Independent, psychologist Natasha Tewari said, quote, "Believe in curses fulfills a need to make sense of an otherwise senseless tragedy. The narrative of curses can be quite compelling. They can offer a coping mechanism in uncertain times or in scenarios which otherwise are sources of sadness and anxiety. We don't typically expect young people to die so close together, hence the 27 Club. There's no 87 Club, right? Although many people tend to die at that age. It's just about what is expected and when it is expected. According to clinical psychologist Dr. Roberta Babb, quote, "These curses and clubs are really about premature death," right? So psychologists believe that these stem from the fact that in the Western world, we don't typically have vocabulary or rituals or rites that center around grief. We typically try to avoid the topic of death, and we don't really dwell on these things in a way that helps us process and feel as though we have closure in tragic events, especially untimely tragic events. According to counselor Josh Smith, as with any avoidance, it will catch up with us. Celebrities can provide kind of a way of talking about death and loss that allows us to be more observer than participant, and it gives us a bit of a safe distance.
Yeah, for me as a kid, it was Steve Irwin.
Yeah. And with that, that's all I have on the 27 Club. This episode is really long. I might split it into 2 episodes, but there was a lot. I really feel as though looking at multiple of these stories side by side really helped to show that, yes, they all died at 27, right? But they all had like really similar problems that they were dealing with. And even then, it's not about the age that they died. It's more about the way we process the grief of losing someone so suddenly and so unexpectedly. But someone in the Discord, actually, I forgot your name, but thank you for requesting this episode because it did send me down a very interesting rabbit hole this week.
Oh, she has straight up, like, while I have been working on all the other videos and everything, she has just been writing. Like, I have never seen her spend so long on a project because she's genuinely been fascinated by all of it. I feel like
recently, all of the projects I've been writing about, because remember the one I did on the true crime episode, that also took me forever because I was like reading, because there's so many things I personally would love to include, but then these episodes would be 5-hour ordeals for all of us involved.
Yeah.
So I have to read everything, and then I try to like pick out what I think is just what is the most relevant for people without making the episode too long.
Yeah, I understand that pain. I actually do understand that pain quite well.
Because I love researching and I love telling a story. Not specifically this story. This was depressing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it was.
But in general, I do enjoy writing a good episode. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Have you ever wondered how inbred the Habsburgs really were? What women in the past used for birth control? Or what Queen Victoria's 9 children got up to? On the History Tea Time podcast, I profile remarkable queens and LGBTQ+ royals, explore royal family trees, and delve into women's medical history and other fascinating topics. Join me every Tuesday for History Tea Time, wherever fine podcasts are enjoyed.